The sun was sinking low over the open plains, bleeding red and gold across the sky, when Elias Cole noticed a horse grow restless. The animal stamped the dirt near the fence line, ears twitching toward the wind. Elias paused mid-step, one rough hand resting on the weathered post. Out here, nothing stirred without reason. The land was too quiet, too honest for false alarms. He listened. At first, there was only the whisper of wind through dry grass and the distant cry of a hawk returning to its nest. Then faint, almost lost beneath the wind, came a sound that didn't belong. A soft gasp. Human. Weak. Elias's jaw tightened. He had learned long ago that trouble never arrived loudly. It crept in low and broken, asking for mercy. He followed the sound beyond the fence, boots crunching against hard earth, until he saw her. She lay crumpled near the edge of the property, dress torn and dust-stained, dark hair tangled across her face. One bare hand reached toward nothing, fingers trembling as if she crawled every inch of the way and still hadn't made it far enough. She was barely conscious. Elias stopped a few steps away, his chest tightening in a way he didn't welcome. Memories rose uninvited. Blood on dirt, a woman screaming, a promise he'd made at a grave long ago. Never again. Strangers brought questions. Questions brought lies. Lies brought graves. Yet the woman coughed weakly, her body shuddering as if the land itself had rejected her. He knelt, up close. She looked younger than he'd expected, though hardship had carved fear into her face. A bruise darkened her cheek. Her lips were cracked, whispering words he couldn't hear. She flinched when his shadow fell over her. "It's all right," he said quietly, though he wasn't sure it was true. His voice sounded foreign to his own ears and used, rough from disuse. Her eyes fluttered open for a moment. They were wide with terror, searching him as if he might be another nightmare. Her lips parted, but whatever she meant to say slipped away, replaced by exhaustion. Her body went limp. Elias cursed under his breath. He could leave her. Plenty of men would. The West was filled with reasons not to care. Instead, he lifted her into his arms. She was lighter than she should have been, fragile as a bird caught in a storm. As he carried her toward the cabin, the sky darkened behind them, night rolling in fast and unforgiving. He did not ask her name. He did not ask where she came from. He did not ask who might be chasing her. He took her inside, shut the door against the coming dark, and unknowingly opened one to a past he had spent years trying to bury. Elias laid her gently on the narrow bed near the hearth, the cabin smelling of smoke, leather, and solitude. The fire had burned low while he was outside. He stirred it back to life, feeding it kindling until warmth crept to the room again. The woman stirred, a soft sound escaping her throat, more breath than voice. He fetched water from a basin and pressed a damp cloth to her forehead. Her skin was hot, too hot. Fever, maybe, or fear that had burned through her strength and left nothing behind. Elias worked in silence. Silence was safer. Silence never asked him to remember. Outside, the wind howled across the plains, rattling the cabin walls like a warning. He locked the door without thinking, then frowned at the instinct. He hadn't locked that door in years. The woman's eyes fluttered open again. This time they stayed open. She stared at the low ceiling, confusion clouding her gaze before it shifted to him. Panic flared instantly. She tried to sit up, failed, and sucked in a sharp breath. "Easy," Elias said, holding up his hands to show they were empty. "You're safe. For now." Her breathing slowed slightly, though fear still clung to her like a second skin. Her voice cracked, barely louder than the fire. "My ranch," he answered. "You were near the fence." She swallowed, eyes darting to the door, then the window. The way she watched every shadow told him more than words ever could. "I won't stay long," she said quickly, as if expecting him to throw her out the moment she admitted it. "That's your choice," Elias replied. "You won't be leaving tonight." She hesitated, then nodded. Exhaustion claimed her again, pulling her back into sleep. Hours passed. The night deepened. Coyotes cried somewhere beyond the hills. Elias sat at the small table, cleaning an old revolver with practiced care. He hadn't touched the weapon in months. Tonight, his fingers moved on their own. She woke screaming just before dawn. He was at her side before he realized he'd stood. Her body thrashed, eyes wild, tears streaking her face as she gasped for air. "No, please don't." "It's all right," he said, gripping her shoulders gently. "You're here. You're safe." Her gaze found his. Recognition flickered, then relief. She clutched his shirt, fingers digging in as if he were the only solid thing left in the world. "I didn't know where else to go," she whispered. Elias stiffened. It wasn't what she said. It was how she said it. The words were heavy with loss, with roads walked too long and choices made too late. He knew that sound. He carried it himself. "What's your name?" he asked before he could stop himself. She hesitated, eyes filling again, then shook her head. "Not yet," she said softly. "Please." Elias nodded once. "Then rest," he replied. "Questions can wait." She watched him like she expected him to change his mind, then slowly, cautiously, lay back against the pillow. As the first pale light of morning crept through the window, Elias stood and turned away, telling himself this was temporary. He had no idea that this quiet woman, sleeping in his bed, hiding her past behind fear, would soon force him to face the one thing he had never survived, his own. Morning came slowly to the plains, pale and uncertain, as if even the sun hesitated to rise over a world like this. Elias stepped outside at first light, breathing in the cold air, grounding himself in routine. He fed the horses, checked the fence line, and scanned the horizon more times than necessary. The land looked the same as it always had, wide, empty, honest. Yet something had shifted. When he returned to the cabin, the woman was awake. She sat at the edge of the bed, wrapped in one of his spare shirts. It swallowed her frame, the sleeves hanging past her hands. Her dark hair fell loose around her shoulders, catching the light from the window. She looked fragile, but there was something else there too, resolve hardening beneath the fear. "I didn't mean to take your bed," she said quickly when she noticed him. "I can move. I can help." "You're fine," Elias interrupted, more sharply than he intended. He softened his voice. "You needed it." She nodded, then hesitated. "Thank you for last night." He grunted, busying himself with the coffee pot. Gratitude always made him uncomfortable. It felt like a debt, and debts had a way of coming due. They ate in silence, the kind that pressed against the ears, heavy with things unsaid. Yet it wasn't unpleasant. It felt careful, respectful. Her name, he learned later that morning, was Clara. She offered it while washing her hands at the basin, eyes lowered, as if bracing herself for judgment. When none came, she let out a breath she'd been holding for years. The days that followed settled into an uneasy rhythm. Clara helped where she could, mending, cooking, tending the small garden near the cabin. She never complained, never asked for more than he gave. At night, she slept lightly, waking at every sound. Elias noticed the way her hands shook when distant riders passed, how she went still at the echo of gunfire drifting from the town miles away. He didn't ask, but he watched, and without meaning to, he began to care. It showed in the small things, leaving extra food on her plate, keeping his rifle within reach, riding the perimeter more often. He told himself it was caution, habit, yet when she smiled at him, tentative and rare, something tight in his chest eased. One evening, a dust storm rolled in fast and angry, swallowing the sky whole. They waited it out inside, the cabin dim and close. Clara sat near the fire, knees drawn up, staring into flames. "Do you ever wish you could start over?" she asked suddenly. Elias stiffened. The fire popped, sparks dancing between them. "Sometimes," he said after a long moment, "but the past has a way of finding you." She nodded, eyes glistening. "I'm afraid of what happens when it does." Before he could respond, a sound carried to the storm, the distant thunder of hooves. Elias was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand, gaze locked on the window. Clara's face drained of color. "They're close," she whispered. Elias turned to her, the weight of that single sentence settling deep in his bones. Whatever she was running from, it had found the trail. The thunder of hooves grew louder, pounding like a heartbeat against the distant hills. Inside the cabin, the air grew thick with tension, every breath a fragile thread ready to snap. Elias stood by the window, rifle ready, eyes sharp despite the storm's fury blurring the view. Clara sat on the edge of the bed, her fingers trembling as she clenched the thin blanket wrapped around her. "They're coming for you," Elias said quietly, voice hardening. "Who is it? What did you do to make them chase you like this?" Clara shook her head, swallowing hard. "I can't say. Not yet. If I tell you, it might put you in danger too." Elias's jaw clenched. Danger had a way of finding him no matter what. He was done running. A shadow appeared on the ridge, a figure atop a horse, silhouetted against the storm-dark sky. Then another and another. Outlaws, or worse. Suddenly, a loud pounding at the cabin door shattered the moment. Elias raised his rifle as Clara's eyes widened in terror. "They'll break it down if you don't open," she whispered, voice breaking. Elias stepped forward, muscles coiled like a spring. His fingers brushed the worn leather of his holster, but something held him back. In that heartbeat, Clara turned to him, her voice barely audible. "Elias, you have to know." He froze. Her eyes, wide and desperate, met his. The name slipped from her lips in a shaky whisper. "Grayson." The single word struck Elias like a bullet to the chest. Grayson, the man he'd buried in his darkest memories. The man who betrayed him, shattered his family, and left a trail of blood across the territory. For years, Elias had thought Grayson dead, vanished into the lawless shadows of the West. Now, that name, spoken by this frightened woman, tied her fate to his in ways he wasn't prepared to face. Silence swallowed the room. Clara's breath hitched. "I ran because of him," she said, voice trembling. "Grayson wants something I have, something that could destroy us both." Elias lowered his rifle slowly, eyes burning with old pain. "You brought Grayson here," he said, barely above a whisper. "No," she pleaded. "I never wanted this. I had nowhere else to run." The pounding at the door grew louder, more urgent. Elias moved to block it, muscles taut. "This ends now," he growled. But inside, a war raged, the past clawing its way back, threatening to tear apart the fragile hope they'd built. In that moment, love felt like a dangerous illusion, one that might cost them everything. And the night was only just beginning. The riders did not break the door. Not that night. They circled the ranch instead, shadows slipping through the storm like wolves testing a fence. By dawn, they were gone, leaving only deep hoofprints in the mud and a silence that felt louder than gunfire. Elias did not speak as he stepped outside. He studied the tracks with the cold precision of a man reading his own death notice. There was no mistaking them. Grayson's men. He would have known their way of riding anywhere, widespread, careless, confident that fear would clear the path ahead of them. Behind him, the cabin door creaked. Clara stood in the doorway, pale, wrapped in her shawl. She looked smaller in the daylight, as if the truth had stripped something vital from her. "I didn't know it was your Grayson," she said softly. Elias turned. His eyes were hard, closed off in a way she hadn't seen before. "There's only one," he replied. He walked past her, brushing dust from his coat, putting distance between them with every step. The land felt hostile now. The ranch, once his refuge, had become a target. Inside the cabin, silence settled like ash. Hours passed. Elias sharpened tools that didn't need sharpening, cleaned a rifle already spotless. Anything to keep his hands busy and his thoughts away from her. Clara watched him from across the room, her heart breaking with every deliberate movement away from her. "I never meant to drag you back into this," she said finally. "If I leave, he'll follow me. Not you." Elias laughed once, sharp, humorless. "You think he'll stop?" He met her eyes. "Grayson doesn't finish things halfway. He never has." She flinched at the bitterness in his voice. "I should go," she whispered. That stopped him. The idea of her walking back into danger alone tightened something deep in his chest. Still, fear was louder than truth. "Maybe you should," he said, even as it felt like tearing flesh from bone. Her eyes filled, but she nodded. Pride held her steady. "I'll leave before sunset," she said. "Thank you for everything." She turned away, packing what little she owned. Elias watched, unmoving, hating himself for his silence. By afternoon, word reached him from town. Grayson was alive, powerful, and looking for a woman who knew too much. The past was no longer knocking. It had kicked the door down. When Elias returned to the ranch at dusk, Clara was gone. The cabin felt emptier than it ever had before. The fire cold, the air hollow. Elias stood in the doorway, realizing too late that pushing her away hadn't saved her. It had only made the world more dangerous. And for the first time in years, Elias Cole was truly afraid, not of death, but of losing the one thing he had never meant to find. Elias didn't sleep that night. The ranch lay quiet beneath a sky smeared with stars, but his mind was alive with ghosts. Grayson's laugh, the crack of gunfire, Clara's face as she turned away. He saddled his horse before dawn, hands steady now, decision carved deep into his bones. Running had cost him everything once. He would not let it take her too. The trail wasn't hard to find. Clara had left in haste, her tracks uneven, leading toward the old road that cut through Dead Man's Pass, the quickest way to town and the most dangerous. Elias followed hard, the wind tearing at his coat, the land rushing past in a blur of resolve. He reached the edge of town just as the sun cleared the horizon. Dust Haven looked the same as it always had. Crooked buildings, broken men, and a saloon that smelled of whiskey and bad choices. But danger hummed in the air like a drawn wire. He saw Clara outside the sheriff's office. 2 men stood with her. Grayson's men. Elias didn't think. He dismounted and drew. Let her go. The street fell silent. The men turned slowly, hands drifting toward their guns. Clara's eyes met Elias's. Shock, relief, fear, all crashing together. One of the men smirked. She belongs to Grayson, he said. You got no claim here. Elias stepped forward. You tell Grayson he's got unfinished business with me. The gunfire was deafening. Wood splintered. Glass shattered. People scattered screaming. Elias moved on instinct, years of buried violence rising to meet the moment. One man went down. Then the other. Clara ran to him, breathless. He's coming, she cried. Grayson, he's already in town. As if summoned by her words, a figure stepped from the saloon shadows. Grayson, older, harder, still wearing the same crooked smile Elias remembered. Well, Grayson drawled, looks like you finally stopped hiding. Elias raised his gun, heart pounding, not with fear but clarity. This time he would finish it. For love, for peace, for the future he had almost thrown away. The street held its breath. Dust drifted between Elias and Grayson like the ashes of everything they had lost. Somewhere a window slammed. A horse whinnied and pulled at its reins. But neither man moved. Grayson's smile widened, slow and cruel. You always were predictable, Elias. Thought you could build a quiet little life and pretend none of this ever happened. Elias didn't lower his gun. His voice was steady, even as his heart thundered. You're done. You were done the day you betrayed me. Grayson laughed. Betrayed you? I saved you. You just didn't have the stomach to become what this world rewards. Behind Elias, Clara stood frozen. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but she couldn't leave him now. Not when he was facing the very shadow she had been fleeing. Tell him, Grayson said, eyes flicking to her. Tell him why you ran. Clara swallowed. Her voice shook, but it carried. I overheard you planning to sell names. Ranchers, families, people who trusted you. Elias was one of them. The smile finally slipped from Grayson's face. Elias felt the truth settle, heavy and solid. His suspicions had never been wrong, only unfinished. You cost me my brother, Elias said, the words cutting deeper than any bullet. You won't take anything else. Grayson's hand twitched. The shot rang out. Elias fired first. Grayson staggered, shock flashing across his face as he fell backward into the dust. The world seemed to tilt, then right itself again. Silence followed, absolute and final. Elias lowered his gun slowly. Clara rushed to him, gripping his coat as if afraid he might vanish. It's over, she whispered. It's finally over. He pulled her close, holding her like something precious and real. For the first time in years, the tightness in his chest eased. Not gone, but lighter. The sheriff arrived moments later, along with half the town. There were questions, statements, witnesses. But the truth stood firm, carried by more than just Elias's word. By sunset, the danger was finished. They returned to the ranch together. That night, they sat on the porch, the land stretching wide and peaceful before them. The past no longer pressed so close. It was still there, but it no longer ruled him. "I don't know what tomorrow looks like," Clara said softly. Elias took her hand, his grip warm and sure. "We'll figure it out. Together." The wind moved gently through the grass, carrying away the last echoes of violence. For the first time since the West had taken everything from him, Elias Cole allowed himself to believe in something simple and brave, a future built not on fear, but on love. Dawn came softly this time. No gunfire, no pounding hooves, just the slow gold of sunrise spilling across the plains, warming the earth as if the land itself were breathing again. Elias stood outside the cabin, coffee steaming in his hands, watching the horizon. For years, mornings have felt like something to endure. Another day survived, nothing more. Today felt different, lighter, earned. Behind him, the door opened. Clara stepped onto the porch, wrapped in his coat. She looked tired, but there was peace in her eyes now, the kind that only comes after fear finally loosens its grip. "Looks like the world didn't end after all," she said softly. Elias smiled, small, real, and rare. "Reckon it's just beginning." They sat together, shoulders touching, listening to the quiet. No words rushed between them. They had learned that silence could be kind. "I was so afraid," Clara said after a while. "Afraid that loving you would get you killed. Afraid that staying would ruin what little peace you had." Elias took her hand. "I spent years afraid that loving anyone would destroy me. Turns out, living without it nearly did." She leaned into him then, resting her head against his chest. He felt her heartbeat, steady, alive, and knew that some promises were worth breaking. The ranch would never be perfect. The past would never vanish completely. But there would be mornings like this. Shared work, shared burdens, shared hope. As the sun climbed higher, Elias rose and offered her his hand. "Stay," he said, not as a plea, as a choice. Clara laced her fingers through his. "I already am." Together, they walked back into the cabin, not as fugitives from the past, but as two people who had faced it and survived, and on that quiet stretch of frontier land, where pain had once ruled and fear had taken root, love finally found a place to grow.